it doesn't change. Sorry about this, guys. We're just going to restart this one right here because I think it was. This is a picture of Clarkson's ham radio station to give you an idea of what you might see at a college ham radio club. I have some skin in this one, and we won November sweepstakes every time we entered. This is K2GXT, Rochester Institute of Technology. K4RI, this is the Auburn, Alabama, Auburn University Amateur Radio Club. W0EEE, which is Missouri Science and Technology. W2CXM, Cornell University. And K4KDJ, Blacksburg, Virginia Tech. So clubs have pretty nice stations. Well, what else can you do at a college ham radio club? Outside of the stations, clubs offer space and tools for student activities. We're talking things like soldering stations, oscilloscopes, maybe logic analyzers, things like this. And then with the higher level of expertise among college faculty and more experience in college hams, you get some pretty interesting things going on. On top of that, you're not just limited to your station. You can use the school's academic labs to contribute to your projects. These are typically going to have nicer tools, more workstations. Maybe if you want to do like a club soldering session where people have a lot of workspaces, you could do that. Or maybe you could use the school's machine shop to manufacture parts for what you're working on. You can see I was over there just using a chasing tool to chase the threads of an antenna rotor before we installed it on a tower. Clubs also receive budgets from the university so that they can do projects, improve the stations, or just do trips or buy food and drinks during a contest. To give you some ideas of what college radio clubs do, this is something that we called the Hinden Nerd at Clarkson. It was a high altitude balloon we built. We think it went up to 80 to 100,000 feet, but we weren't entirely sure because the GPS transmitter wasn't formatting the altitude sentences correctly, so we're just judging it by the photos that we took. Cornell did something very similar. They've done a lot of these. This one I thought was interesting because it was just a card shop balloon that they attached a micro payload to, and it went up to something like 20,000 feet before it popped over kind of south of Norwich and was retrieved. RIT built a radio-controlled blimp that they fly at their hockey games. So they built the controller boards and stuff for this, and they had to make sure that the thing was able to be reliably controlled so it wouldn't be interfering with the games. They also had a NOAA satellite receiver that they were using to download imagery from NOAA satellites that were passing overhead. And this was another thing we did. At Clarkson, we had some satellite activity, which is a popular one just because it's easy, it's simple to do, although some schools like Virginia Tech has AS-L directable arrays for this, but we just would do it portable, and it's very rewarding for people who get into it. So why else, other than what the activities you do, might you want to be involved in this? Well, you're going to have better opportunities to interact with the university and such like this. For one, freshmen are going to meet upperclassmen very early. That's good for them to get acquainted with the university, learn things about how things go on, and this is not just because upperclassmen will know how to jimmy half the locks on campus. I'm looking at one out there. You can have relationships with faculty outside of the classroom. You can even get academic credit for doing certain club projects. Then you can base academic research on club projects as well. For instance, Nathaniel, W2NAF, and he's in the back of the room over there, he recently got his PhD at Virginia Tech. He was studying ionospheric weather patterns and their effect on propagation. And he used things like the reverse beacon network and some super darn HF radars to source his data. College ham radio clubs give you opportunities to get involved with the community, usually through local area ham radio clubs. We're talking opportunities to participate in events like Jamboree on the Air, provide communications for bike races, road rallies, and such like this. So this is what you can do in college ham radio clubs. Well, what are you going to take with you when you graduate? The whole point of college is to prepare you for your career. Now it turns out that being in a ham radio club helps you do that much better because it gets you a lot of real world experience. So to give you an idea of things that you might learn that are relevant to industry from ham radio, I'm sure a lot of you have used pan adapters on radios. We've got a Flex there in this picture, the Elecraft, the other one's an ICOM. Well, what these really are spectrum analyzers. So if you have experience using pan adapters, you probably know the basics of how to use a spectrum analyzer. On that note, antenna analyzers, which we use to generate SWR and Smith charts, they're simple vector network analyzers. And I don't know any graduating electrical engineers who, out of their coursework, knew how to use one of these when they graduated. So I'm sure plenty of you have set up multi-transceiver stations. Maybe you've put up an antenna farm. When you do this, you have to figure out how to get a lot of radios and antennas to behave in close proximity. They need to resonate and they need to function. And maybe you're trying to do something like a multi-2 contest station where you also desire to transmit and receive simultaneously on 2 different antennas. The designer of your cell phone had to do the same thing, as did many people who work in the wireless industry. This phone, which I can hold in my hand, has antennas for several bands of LTE, 3G, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, near-field communications, and GPS. Maybe I'm even forgetting one. There's a lot of stuff in this phone. Well, the user expects them all to work concurrently. Maybe you were asking the Google machine how to get to Hare Arena this morning. If you did that and you had your voice prompts being piped into your car's stereo, you were using maybe your Bluetooth, you were using the cell data network to receive the data to figure out where to go, you were using the GPS to figure out where you are. And you don't expect to have to shut off your Bluetooth for your GPS to work. And that's because somebody figured out how to get all this stuff to work in close proximity. Maybe designing antennas, filters, and transceivers. And then when somebody screws it up, everybody knows really quickly. This was an interesting case a few years ago. The iPhone 4 used external antennas to save space. Well, it turned out if the user put his finger where the 2 antennas align, it would couple the transceivers together, desense the cell transceiver, and drop calls as soon as people picked up the phone. Well, you don't want this to happen, and it turns out in a ham radio club you learn the basics of this. Maybe you guys have done a RIDI station or something digital. Well, that's the same thing as building a digital wireless system, maybe an APCO 25 radio or a wireless system, or wireless network. So pretty much what you're doing is you're connecting a digital transceiver to an analog subsystem. In the world of ham radio, we might do that with a sound card and cables, but it's the same thing when you're designing a system like this, except it's all built into the same box, maybe on the same board. So in one case, you're sending one waveform into the transmitter. In another case, you're sending a different one. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. you learn these things in college ham radio clubs if you've ever built a station like this. Software-defined radio is maybe a novelty or maybe something high performance like the Flex. But in industry, we use this as a much higher performance way to make better systems. You can do things like a radar system based on SDR is going to be able to change modes just by changing the software rather than having to spend months and tens of thousands of dollars developing a new board. So beyond the skills that one learns in the club, the projects are yours. There's no instructions to follow. This is not like a lab for a course where it's been done 15 different times over the years, and the TAs and the professors know what the common problems are. In that case, a lot of times you can go and tap the professor's shoulder and say, well, why isn't my project working? Well, you can't do that when you're building your own stuff. Just like industry, you're going to learn to troubleshoot and debug because you're going to have to when you're building your own projects. So, you've done all these things in a college radio club. Well, these things make you very strong job applicants. This stuff goes on resumes too. This is an example up there of how I wrote a few things pertaining to Clarkson's Tower project up on one of my buddy's resumes after we got done with it. Now consider this. When I'm standing at the C-Speed booth, which is the company that I work for, at the job fair, after the first 3 or 4 applicants come by, I already know what the lab projects were for that year because everybody tells me them. And probably they haven't changed in the past 5 years or since I was at school. Well, those people don't sound very interesting to me. Okay, everybody did the school lab, I know that. Well, what makes you unique? What makes you a better candidate? Well, if you can talk about some things that you did in the college club, I'm going to say, well, that's really interesting. You have some motivation, you have some passion, and a student like that is going to be much more likely to go to the top of my list of resumes and to get a job interview out of me. This leads to some unique career opportunities. And it is, not just the way that this can get your hand in the door because you're a good candidate, but you have